Hi everyone! Tonight we're stepping into a world of ice and iron, where the Roman Empire meets the frozen edge of the known world. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy what we do here. And drop your location and the time you're watching in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're drifting off to sleep. Now, dim those lights, get comfortable, and let's walk together into the winter of 1 CE, along the Danube frontier. You wake before dawn in a timber-framed barrack that smells of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint metallic tang of oiled leather. Your breath clouds in the darkness above your narrow cot. Through the cracks in the wooden walls you hear the wind, not howling yet, but persistent, testing every joint and seam of this frontier fort like an enemy probing for weakness. You might not realise it, but autumn has already surrendered to winter. The first frost came 3 days ago, silver and silent, coating the wooden palisade walls in a skin of ice that glittered at sunrise. The river, that great grey artery of the Danube, has begun to thicken at its edges. In another month, maybe less, it will freeze solid enough for men to walk across, and when that happens, the barbarians will come. Here's a historical fact. The Roman Empire's northern frontier stretched over 3,000 miles, from the North Sea to the Black Sea, with major sections following the Rhine and Danube rivers. These weren't just borders on a map, they were living, breathing defence systems that required constant maintenance, especially in winter when rivers froze and natural barriers became highways for raiders. You pull the rough wool blanket tighter around your shoulders and sit up, feet finding the cold planks of the floor. Around you, other soldiers stir in the pre-dawn gloom. Someone coughs, a deep, wet sound that echoes in the cramped space. Another man mutters a prayer to Mars under his breath, the words barely audible over the creak of leather and wood as men dress for another day of building. The air inside the barrack is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, yesterday's stew still clinging to wooden bowls, and the ever-present smoke from the brazier in the corner. You can taste it on your tongue, bitter, sooty, but oddly comforting because it means warmth. Outside, the temperature has dropped to what you'd call freezing, though the Romans had no such convenient number. They just as knew that water turned to stone and fingers went numb if you weren't careful. Listen to the sounds around you, the scrape of iron on stone as someone sharpens a tool, the rhythmic thud of boots on frozen ground outside, the distant clang of the smithy already at work. The fort is waking up, joint by joint, like an ancient beast stretching in the cold. You dress quickly, tunic first, then the heavy wool sagum cloak that will be your constant companion for the next 4 months. Your fingers work the bronze fibula, clasp, muscle memory sustowobry guiding the motion, even in darkness. The weight of the cloak settles on your shoulders like an old friend, and you're grateful for every fibre. Scholars debate whether Roman soldiers were adequately prepared for extreme cold. Some argue that Mediterranean-raised legionaries suffered terribly in Germanic winters. Others point to evidence of sophisticated cold-weather gear. Thick cloaks, fur linings, layered tunics, even primitive woolen socks. The truth, as always, lives somewhere in the middle. Some men adapted, some endured, some didn't survive to complain. Outside, the parade ground is a study in shadows and silver. Frost covers everything, the packed earth, the wooden walls, the tents of auxiliary troops camped beyond the main fort. The eastern sky is just beginning to pale, that deep blue-black giving way to something softer, though sunrise is still an hour away. Your breath joins the breath of hundreds of other men, creating a low-hanging mist that hovers over the fort like a spirit. The centurion is already there, of course. Marcus Valerius, a brick of a man who seems immune to cold, stands with arms crossed, watching as his century assembles. His face is weathered like old leather, creased with lines that speak of 25 years on the frontier. When he speaks, his voice cuts through the morning chill like a blade. "Today, we finish the North Wall extension," he announces. No preamble, no pleasantries. The engineers say we have maybe 3 weeks before the Danube freezes solid. That means 3 weeks to make this fort into something that can hold against what's coming. You've heard this before, variations of it anyway, but the urgency in his tone has changed. Yesterday it was important. Today it feels necessary, like breath. Here's something quirky. Roman soldiers often gave their fortifications nicknames, some respectful, others less so. This particular extension was called the Long Wait by the men, because that's what it represented, the long winter wait for raiders who would inevitably come when the ice made the river erode. The work detail assembles quickly. You're handed tools, a broad-bladed dolabra, something between an axe and a pickaxe, its weight familiar in your hands. Others receive shovels, baskets for moving earth, iron spikes for timber work. The centurion divides you into groups with the efficiency of long practice. You're assigned to the timber crew, which means your morning will be spent in the forest, cutting and dragging logs back to the fort. As you march out through the fort's eastern gate, the ground crunches beneath your callagi, those famous hobnailed sandals that are surprisingly effective even in cold weather, though your feet would disagree. The leather is stiff with frost, the metal hobnails clicking against frozen earth like 100 tiny hammers. It's almost rhythmic, almost meditative, click, click, click. The forest lies a quarter mile from the fort, dark and deep, the kind of place where shadows seem to have weight. This is the edge of the empire, and the trees know it. They tower above you, oak and ash and beech, their branches bare now, creating a latticework of grey against the paling sky. The smell here is different from the fort, clean, sharp with pine, and the damp earth smell of decomposing leaves. You might wonder how it felt to be a Roman soldier so far from home, from the warm stone cities of Italia, or the sun-drenched provinces of Hispania. The answer is complicated. Some men thrived on the frontier, found purpose in the constant challenge. Others counted the days until discharge, dreaming of olive groves and warm seas. Most fell somewhere in between, doing the work because it was the work, finding meaning in small things, a good meal, a dry bed, the respect of their comrades. The work begins as soon as you reach the tree line. The Optio, second in command, points out the trees marked for cutting, straight, tall specimens that will make good beams and posts. You and 3 others approach the first one, an oak that must be 80 years old, its trunk thick as 2 men standing side by side. The first bite of the axe into wood sends a shock up your arms. The sound echoes through the forest, a warp, clean crack that startles birds from nearby trees. Again and again you swing, finding a rhythm with your partners. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The chips fly pale yellow against the dark bark, and you feel the heat building in your shoulders despite the cold. Fringe fact, Roman foresters used a technique called ringing or girdling trees the season before cutting them down. They'd strip a ring of bark around the trunk, killing the tree but letting it dry while still standing. This made for lighter, easier to work timber, though whether winter work crews bothered with such niceties when speed was essential is debatable. After what feels like hours but is probably only 30 minutes, the tree shudders. "Clear!" someone shouts, and you step back as the oak leans, pauses as if reconsidering, then falls with a tremendous crash that sends up a spray of frost and dead leaves. For a moment the forest goes silent, as if shocked by the violence. Then the birds return and work continues. Dragging the log back to the fort is harder than cutting it. Even with 4 men on ropes and using rollers, smaller logs placed beneath to help it move, progress is measured in yards, not miles. The rope bites into your shoulder through the cloak, and your feet slip on frost-slick ground. But you pull one step at a time, breathing hard, watching your breath mix with your comrades in the cold air. By the time you return to the fort, the sun has fully risen, weak and pale as watered wine, offering light but precious little warmth. The temperature hovers just below freezing, cold enough to keep the frost but not cold enough to make work impossible. Yet, inside the fort the engineers are already at work on the wall extension. These are the men who make the impossible routine, measuring with stretched cords, marking post holes with sharp stakes, calculating angles and load-bearing weights using knowledge passed down through generations. They work with the focused intensity of surgeons, because in a way they are. Every fortification is a kind of surgery on the landscape, cutting and shaping earth and wood into a defence that might save lives. You watch as they direct the placement of your hard-won log. It will become part of the palisade wall, sharpened at one end and driven deep into the ground, standing shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of others. The engineer's groma, a Roman surveying tool with weighted plumb lines, hangs nearby, ensuring the wall runs straight and true. Feel the weight of this moment. You're building more than a wall, you're building confidence, morale, the psychological certainty that when winter truly arrives and the ice makes the river crossable, there will be something between you and the darkness beyond. The morning stretches into afternoon, measured not by sundial but by aching muscles and the gradual warming of the day, though warming is relative. Perhaps it reaches just above freezing, enough that the frost on the palisade begins to drip, creating tiny waterfalls of melting ice. Your hands are red and raw despite the leather gloves, and your back protests every time you bend to lift another log. But there's a rhythm to it all, a pattern that makes the work bearable. The thud of axes in the forest, the scrape of shovels digging post holes, the clang of hammers driving iron stakes, the grunts and curses of men doing hard labour. It's a symphony of construction, and you're part of the orchestra. Here's a historical fact. Roman military engineers, or architecti, were highly skilled specialists who could design and build everything from temporary marching camps to permanent stone fortresses. They understood principles of load distribution, drainage, sightlines, and defensive geometry that wouldn't be formally codified for centuries. Every Roman legion had engineers attached to it, and every soldier received basic training in fortification work. The empire was built as much by the Dolabra as the gladius. As the light begins to fade, winter days are short this far north, the work doesn't stop so much as shift. The forest crews return to the fort, and evening work begins, maintaining tools, repairing damage to existing structures, checking the condition of stored supplies. Winter fortification isn't just building new defences, it's ensuring everything already built can survive the coming months. You file into the mess hall with your contubernium, the 8-man tent group that forms the basic unit of Roman military organisation. These are the men you live with, fight with, and right now, build with. The bonds formed by shared hardship run deep, deeper than family sometimes. The evening. Meal is simple. Barley porridge thickened with bits of salted pork, hard bread softened in warm wine, a few withered apples from storage. It's not the banquets of Rome, but after a day of hard labour in the cold, it tastes like victory. You eat slowly, savouring each bite, feeling the warmth spread from your belly outward. Around you, men talk in low voices. Some discuss tomorrow's work, others tell jokes. Old ones worn smooth by repetition, but still capable of drawing laughs. One man carves something from a piece of wood. You can't tell what yet, but his knife moves with practiced certainty. The Optio stops by, checking on morale, making sure no one's too injured or sick to work tomorrow. It's care disguised as duty, and everyone pretends not to notice. Scholars debate the quality of life for Roman soldiers on the frontier. Some accounts paint a picture of misery. Cold, disease, constant danger, poor food. Other evidence suggests reasonably comfortable conditions. Regular pay, adequate supplies, meaningful work, strong camaraderie. The reality, as with most things, was probably variable. A well-commanded unit in a well-supplied fort could live decently. A neglected garrison in a forgotten posting could suffer terribly. As darkness fully settles over the fort, you make your way back to the barrack. The temperature is dropping again. You can feel it in the way the air bites at exposed skin, in the way moisture in your nose freezes with each breath. Above, stars appear, sharp and cold and impossibly distant, like holes punched in the sky to let in the light beyond. Before sleep, you perform the small rituals that keep you human, checking your gear for tomorrow, whispering a prayer to whatever gods are listening, thinking briefly of home, wherever that is now. The fort is settling down for the night, but guards still walk the walls, and the smithy fire still glows, never truly extinguished. The work is never fully done. You lie back on your cot, the thin mattress doing little to soften the wooden frame and pull the blanket up to your chin. Around you, men begin to snore, that strangely comforting sound of human presence. Tomorrow will bring more cutting, more dragging, more building. Tomorrow will bring you one day closer to winter, one day closer to the test of everything you're building now. But tonight, you rest. Tonight, the walls hold, and that is enough. The morning brings something new, snow. Not much, just a dusting really, but enough to transform the fort into something strange and beautiful, all edges softened, all sounds muffled. You wake to a quieter world, and it takes you a moment to understand why. You might not realise it, but this changes everything. The engineers have been watching the sky for days, reading weather signs the way priests read entrails. Snow this early means the freeze will come soon, maybe sooner than expected, which means the construction timeline just accelerated. The briefing happens in the fall. Principia, the headquarters building at the fort's centre. It's warmer here. There's a hypocaust beneath the floor, one of the few in the fort radiating gentle heat upward. The room smells of wax tablets, lamp oil, and the damp wool of many cloaks. Officers stand around a large table where a model of the fort sits, carved from wood and painted with meticulous care. The chief engineer, Gaius Petronius, is speaking. He's older, maybe 50, with grey in his beard and hands scarred from decades of work. But his eyes are sharp, and when he talks about walls and ditches and angles of approach, men listen. "The river is our advantage," he says, pointing to the blue-painted strip representing the Danube on the model. "But only while it flows. Once it freezes, and it will freeze, it becomes their highway. We've seen it before. Thousands of men crossing the ice, moving faster than we'd like, hitting us where we're weakest." Here's a historical fact. River freezing was a serious strategic concern for Roman frontier commanders. The Rhine and Danube rivers weren't just borders, they were defensive moats that required no maintenance and effectively controlled movement for most of the year. But in severe winters, they froze solid enough to support wagons and cavalry. Historical records document multiple barbarian invasions that occurred specifically during winter freezes, most famously the crossing of the Rhine in 406 CE that precipitated the Western Empire's collapse. Petronius continues, using a wooden pointer to indicate sections of the fort's perimeter. "We're extending the north wall to include the granary and the extra barracks we built last summer. That's an additional 300 feet of palisade, plus corner towers here and here." He taps 2 spots on the model. "We're also deepening the ditch on the riverside. If they come across the ice, they'll hit a 10-foot ditch before they reach the wall." Someone asks the obvious question: will we finish in time? The engineer's pause is brief but telling. "If the weather holds, yes. If we get an early hard freeze." He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. You're assigned to the ditch crew today, which means your morning will be spent doing what Roman soldiers do best: digging. The dolabra that felt so appropriate for timber work yesterday now seems perfectly designed for breaking frozen earth. It's almost funny how versatile the tool is. Almost, because right now, with your shoulders still aching from yesterday's log hauling, it just feels heavy. The ditch runs parallel to the north wall about 20 feet out. It's already partially dug, started weeks ago when the weather was milder. But it needs to be deeper and wider. The engineers want it 10 feet deep and 12 feet across, with the spoil piled on the fort side to create an additional rampart. It's simple, brutal, effective engineering. Make the enemy work for every foot of ground. The dirt here is mixed with stones, river stones rounded smooth by millennia of water flow, which makes digging frustrating. Your dolabra bites into earth, hits a stone and sends a jarring shock up your arms. Again and again, scrape, strike, curse, scrape, strike, curse. It becomes a rhythm almost meditative in its repetition, though your hands would prefer something less meditative and more restful. You can smell the earth as you dig, rich, damp, slightly metallic. It's the smell of creation and destruction mixed together, of landscape being reshaped by human will. There's something primal about it, something that connects you to every builder who ever lived, from the men who raised the pyramids to the ones who'll build skyscrapers in a future you can't imagine. Fringe fact. Romans sometimes deliberately placed sharpened stakes at the bottom of the defensive ditches, creating what they called lilia, lilies, because the pattern of stakes supposedly resembled the flower. Whether this was done at every fort or just in critical defensive positions is debated. The effort required to make and maintain such obstacles was substantial, and not every garrison had the time, resources, or perceived threat level to justify them. Around midday, the snow stops, and the sun makes a weak appearance low on the southern horizon. It provides almost no warmth but plenty of light, turning the snow into a blanket of white that reflects the pale blue sky. For a moment it's beautiful enough to make you pause, to make you forget the ache in your back and the cold in your toes. Then the Optio shouts, "Back to work," and the moment passes. The engineers are everywhere today, checking measurements, adjusting angles, consulting their wax tablets filled with calculations. They work with plumb lines and levelling instruments, ensuring the ditch maintains a consistent depth and the walls stay truly vertical. It's painstaking work, the kind that seems obsessive until you understand what's at stake. One engineer, younger, maybe your age, kneels beside the ditch with what looks like a bronze triangle. You watch as he uses it to check the angle of the ditch wall. He makes a mark with chalk, stands and calls to the diggers. "Needs to be steeper here. We want it as close to vertical as the soil will hold." You might wonder why they're so particular about angle. The answer is simple: climbing. A gentle slope is easy to scramble up, even in armour. A vertical or near vertical wall is much harder, especially when you're under missile fire and your hands are cold and your friends are dying around you. Every degree matters. Every inch counts. Here's a historical fact. Roman military engineering manuals, like Vegetius's De Re Militari, written in the 4th century CE, codified centuries of practical knowledge into specific measurements and techniques. A defensive ditch should be 9 feet deep and 12 feet wide. A palisade should be 10 to 12 feet tall with sharpened tops. Watchtowers should be placed no more than a bowshot apart. These weren't arbitrary numbers. They were battle-tested specifications refined through generations of warfare. By late afternoon, your section of ditch has reached the required depth. The engineers approve it with nods and chalk marks on their tablets. You climb out, muscles screaming, and look back at what you've accomplished. A raw, ugly gash in the earth that might save lives. It's not pretty work, but it's honest. The palisade team has made progress too. The wall extension is taking shape log by log, each post driven deep and tamped tight with earth and stones. From a distance, it already looks formidable. A fence of death 10 feet tall, each log sharpened into a brutal point. Up close, you can see the individual variations. Bark still clinging to some logs, smooth-cut surfaces on others, the occasional crack or knot that the engineers deemed acceptable. Tomorrow, the woodworkers will add the fighting platform, a walkway behind the wall that lets defenders stand at the right height to thrust spears or throw javelins at attackers. But today, the focus is simply getting the wall itself in place, creating the barrier, establishing the line between us and them. As the sun sets ridiculously early, barely mid-afternoon by summer standards, you gather with others for the evening inspection. The Centurion walks the new wall, checking each post, testing for wobble or weakness. He finds a few that need to be reset, marks them with chalk and moves on. It's not criticism, it's quality control. Lives depend on these logs holding. Scholars debate whether Roman forts were over-engineered for the threats they faced. Some argue that the elaborate defences, multiple ditches, high walls, towers, gates with complex locking mechanisms, were excessive for facing tribal raiders with limited siege equipment. Others point out that these defences had to account for worst-case scenarios. Large, organised attacks during winter, when help couldn't arrive quickly. The engineering wasn't about average days, it was about surviving the terrible ones. That evening, as you eat your ration of bread and cheese, someone mentions the Marcomannic Wars, the conflict that brought you here to this frozen frontier. For years, Germanic tribes have been pressing against the Empire's borders, sometimes raiding, sometimes invading in force. These aren't mindless barbarians, they're organised, led by chiefs who understand Roman tactics, equipped with Roman weapons taken from previous battles or bought from corrupt traders. You've never fought them directly, you've been on building duty since arriving at the fort, but you've heard the stories. How they move fast, hit hard and disappear into the forest before reinforcements arrive. How they know the terrain better than any Roman ever could. How they're driven not just by greed for loot, but by something deeper. Pressure from other tribes pushing from the east. Climate is affecting their harvests, populations growing beyond what their lands can support. It's easier to call them enemies, harder to understand they're human too, facing their own impossible choices. The night is cold again, colder than last night, and you pull your blanket tight as you settle onto your cot. Outside you can hear the guards changing watch, the sound of hobnailed boots on frozen ground, the password being exchanged in low voices. The fort sleeps, but it never truly rests. Before sleep takes you, you think about what you're building, not just walls and ditches, but something less tangible. Confidence. Every foot of palisade, every yard of ditch is a message to everyone inside these walls that says, we are prepared, we will hold. And maybe, in the end, that psychological fortification is just as important as the physical one. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, always does on the frontier. But tonight, wrapped in wool and wood smoke, listening to the quiet sounds of men sleeping nearby, you feel something unexpected. Peace, not happiness exactly, but the deep satisfaction that comes from work that matters, from being part of something larger than yourself. The engineers say you have 2 more weeks before the river freezes. 2 more weeks to turn earth and timber into hope. You drift off thinking of measurements and angles, of ditches and walls, of home and duty and the strange mathematics of survival. You wake to the sound of hammering, not the irregular rhythm of construction, but the steady, purposeful striking of metal on metal. The smithy is working early today, and the sound carries through the cold morning air like a heartbeat. The barrack is warmer than usual. Someone has kept the brazier fed through the night, a small mercy that makes the transition from sleep to wakefulness less brutal. You can smell the charcoal acrid but welcome, mixing with the usual sense of wool and leather and humanity packed into close quarters. You might not think about heat as infrastructure, but on the frontier in winter, warmth is as essential as walls. Without it, men freeze. With it, they survive, work, remain effective. The Romans understood this, and their solutions ranged from simple to surprisingly sophisticated. Here's a historical fact. The hypocaust system, invented around the 1st century BCE, was Rome's answer to central heating. Hot air from a furnace circulated beneath raised floors and through hollow walls, heating rooms with remarkable efficiency. While full hypocaust systems were typically reserved for bathhouses and important buildings, frontier forts adapted the technology where possible, creating heating systems that kept key structures, headquarters, hospitals and officers' quarters, habitable even in severe cold. Today's assignment takes you to one such project, installing a heating system in the fort's expanded hospital building. The work crew gathers outside the structure, which is still partially under construction. The walls are up, timber frame filled with wattle and daub, but the floor remains unfinished, exposing the foundation work beneath. The engineer in charge today is Marcus Tullius, a specialist in heating systems who was transferred to the fort specifically for winter preparation. He's younger than Petronius, maybe 35, with the build of someone who spent equal time designing and building. When he speaks, his voice carries the patient tone of a teacher. The principle is simple, he explains, gesturing to the space beneath where the floor will go. We create a chamber, about 2 feet high, supported by small pillars. Fire heats air in the furnace here. He points to a structure at one end, and the hot air flows through the chamber, warming the floor above. Simple physics. Hot air rises and radiates heat upward. You might wonder if this seems too sophisticated for a frontier fort, but the Romans didn't see it that way. To them, this was practical engineering, no different from building a proper latrine or drainage system. Civilization wasn't something you left behind when you crossed the frontier. It was what you built to prove the frontier wasn't going to break you. The work begins with the pillars, small stacks of brick, each about 18 inches high, arranged in a grid pattern. Your job is to set these precisely, using a leveling tool to ensure each one is exactly the right height. The bricks are cold in your hands, rough-surfaced, heavy enough to be satisfying when you set them in place. The mortar smells sharp, almost astringent, lime and sand mixed with water, the same basic recipe used for centuries. You spread it carefully between each brick, building your pillar one course at a time. It's meticulous work requiring attention and patience, a different kind of labour than swinging an axe or digging a ditch. Listen to the sounds. Trowels scraping on brick, mortar squelching as it's spread, the quiet concentration of men doing precise work. Occasionally someone asks for more mortar, and a helper brings a fresh batch, steam rising from the bucket in the cold air. Fringe fact: Romans sometimes added animal blood or hair to mortar to improve its binding properties and cold weather performance. The blood proteins acted as a plasticizer, making the mortar more workable and slightly more resistant to frost damage. Whether this was standard practice or regional variation is debated, but archaeological analysis of frontier forts has found organic compounds in mortar samples that suggest the practice was more common than literary sources indicate. By midday, your section of the pillar grid is complete. You step back and survey the work. Dozens of small brick columns standing like a miniature forest, perfectly aligned, each one supporting the weight of the floor that will soon cover them. It's oddly beautiful in its precision, this hidden architecture that no one will see once the floor is laid. Marcus Tullius walks through, checking heights, testing stability. He nods approval, marks your section as complete on his wax tablet. Good work. Remember, men will walk on this floor, sleep in beds above it, recover from wounds in the warmth it provides. What you've built today might save lives in ways you'll never know. The floor itself goes down in the afternoon. Thick wooden planks laid across the pillars, fitting together with practiced precision. As each board is set in place, the hypocaust chamber below disappears from view, becoming a secret space of warm air and invisible engineering. But not all heating in the fort is so sophisticated. Most buildings rely on simpler methods: braziers, open hearths, careful design to trap and circulate heat. The barracks where you sleep has both: a brazier that can be moved as needed, and a small hearth in the centre, its smoke venting through a simple hole in the roof. You spend the late afternoon working on improving the barracks' heating. Not glamorous work, but necessary. Someone discovered that one section of wall has developed gaps where the mud daubing has cracked and fallen away. Cold air leaks through, making one corner of the room nearly uninhabitable at night. The repair is straightforward: mix fresh daub, clay, sand, straw and water, and pack it into the gaps. The mixture is cold and wet in your hands, gritty with sand clinging to your skin. You work it into the cracks like you're healing a wound, smoothing it flush with the wall surface. The smell of fresh daub is earthy, organic, the smell of clay and wet straw. It reminds you of building things as a child, making simple structures from mud and imagination. There's something fundamentally human about working with earth and water, shaping raw materials into shelter. You might not realise how much of Roman military success came down to moments like this. Not dramatic battles or brilliant tactics, but simple maintenance, careful attention to the small things that keep men healthy and effective. An army that sleeps warm is an army that stays strong. Here's a historical fact. Roman military manuals devoted significant space to fort maintenance and winterization. Vegetius, writing in the 4th century CE, emphasized that garrison commanders should inspect buildings regularly, repair damage immediately, and ensure adequate heating and ventilation. Neglect of these seemingly minor details could lead to disease, low morale, and reduced combat effectiveness, problems far more dangerous than they might appear. As evening approaches, you're assigned to the wood detail, gathering and processing fuel for the fort's various fires. This is ongoing work, never truly finished. The fort consumes wood constantly, cooking fires, heating braziers, the smithy, the bathhouse furnace, and now the hypocaust systems being installed in key buildings. The wood storage area is impressive in its organisation. Logs are sorted by size and type: oak for long-burning heat, pine for quick kindling, birch for the bathhouse where consistent temperature matters. Everything is stacked off the ground on wooden pallets, keeping it dry and accessible even when snow piles up. You join a crew splitting logs, using iron wedges and wooden mallets to crack the rounds into usable pieces. The work is physical, satisfying in its simplicity. Place the wedge, strike hard, feel the wood split with a sharp crack. The fresh split wood smells clean, resinous, different for each species. The rhythm of work creates a kind of meditation. Lift the mallet, strike, reposition the wedge, strike again. Your muscles warm despite the cold, and steam rises from your shoulders as sweat meets frigid air. Around you, others work with similar focus, and the pile of split wood grows steadily. Scholars debate the environmental impact of Roman frontier forts. Each installation required enormous amounts of timber for initial construction, ongoing maintenance, daily fuel consumption. Some researchers estimate a single fort could consume hundreds of cords of wood annually. This likely led to significant deforestation around long-term installations, changing local ecosystems in ways that might still be visible in pollen records and archaeological landscapes today. As darkness falls, you carry armloads of split wood to various stations around the fort. The barrack gets a supply, enough for several days if used carefully. The headquarters building, with its hypocaust, receives higher quality oak. The watchtowers along the wall each get a portion, ensuring the guards can maintain small fires through the long, cold nights. The final delivery is to the Principia, where officers are meeting to discuss winter preparations. You stack the wood neatly in the designated storage area, and as you work, you catch fragments of their conversation. River ice formation, earlier than expected. Double the watch rotation when it freezes. Supply caravan delayed, might not arrive until... The words fade as you finish and leave, but they linger in your mind. Everything comes back to the river, to the ice, to what winter will bring when the Danube becomes a bridge instead of a barrier. You return to the barrack as the evening meal is being distributed. Tonight it's a thick pottage, barley and lentils with bits of salt pork seasoned with herbs from the fort's garden that were dried and stored for winter use. The smell is rich, savoury, and your stomach reminds you that you've been working since dawn. The meal is served hot, steaming in wooden bowls, and you cradle yours in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. The first spoonful tastes of salt and fat and earth, simple flavours that become profound when you're cold and hungry. Feel the warmth spreading through you, the food heating you from inside, the brazier radiating heat from the corner, the press of bodies creating shared warmth in the close quarters. This is civilization at Danus, its most basic: shelter, food, fire, community. Everything else is elaboration. As the evening settles, someone produces a small lamp, and a few men gather around it to play dice, their voices low, punctuated by occasional laughter or groans as fortune shifts. Others tend to personal tasks, mending clothes, sharpening knives, writing letters that may or may not ever reach their destinations. You find yourself near the brazier, watching the coals pulse with heat, glowing orange and red in the dimness. Fire is humanity's oldest technology, and yet it still feels like magic, this controlled burning that keeps the darkness and cold at bay. Here's something quirky. Roman soldiers sometimes heated stones in their braziers and then wrapped them in cloth to create portable heat sources, ancient hot water bottles essentially. These could be taken to the bed or carried on guard duty, providing hours of warmth from a single heated stone. It's the kind of practical innovation that rarely makes it into official records but represents the real ingenuity of daily survival. The night deepens and gradually the barrack quiets. Men retreat to their cots, pulling blankets tight, settling into sleep's warmth. The brazier is banked for the night, damped down to burn steadily, providing steady heat without constant tending. You lie in your usual sud, the wooden frame familiar beneath you, the wool blanket scratchy but warm. Through the repaired wall you can hear the wind picking up, testing the fort's defences again. But inside, the heat holds, the walls stand, and sleep comes easier tonight. Tomorrow will bring more building, more preparation, more small victories against winter's approach. But tonight, surrounded by the warmth created by human effort and ingenuity, you rest in the knowledge that civilization is more than marble columns and paved roads. Sometimes it's just a well-built fire and a patched wall keeping the cold at bay. The dawn brings a change in temperature. Colder now, noticeably so. The frost on the inside of the barrack walls has thickened overnight, creating delicate patterns of ice crystals that catch the early light. You can see your breath hanging in the air like morning fog, and when you place your feet on the floor, the cold shoots through you like a shock. You might not realise it, but the fort's perimeter is evolving. Each day brings subtle changes. A section of wall completed here, a tower rising there, transforming the installation from good enough to genuinely formidable. Today's work centres on the watchtowers, those crucial elevated positions that extend vision beyond the walls and provide platforms for defensive fire. The north wall extension requires 2 new towers, and you're assigned to the construction crew for the eastern one. Here's a historical fact. Roman watchtowers followed standardised designs that balanced functionality with construction efficiency. A typical tower stood 20-30 feet tall with a square footprint of about 15 by 15 feet. The ground floor served as storage and shelter for the watch crew. The second floor provided elevated observation and fighting positions. These towers were placed every 80 to 120 feet along walls, close enough that defenders could cover gaps with missile fire, far enough apart to be resource efficient. The tower's foundation is already complete, a square of mortared stone sunk below the frost line to prevent shifting. Now comes the timber frame, and this is where engineering meets carpentry in ways that make you appreciate the skills you've been learning since arriving at the fort. The master carpenter, an auxiliary soldier named Brennus from Gaul, directs the work with calm authority. He's built dozens of towers over his 20 years of service, and his hands move with the confidence of deep expertise. When he speaks, his Latin carries a thick accent, but his meaning is always clear. Corner posts first, he instructs, pointing to 4 massive timbers lying nearby. These carry the weight of everything above. They must be perfect, vertical, secure, aligned. If these fail, the tower fails. You and 3 others lift the first corner post, an oak timber that must weigh close to 200 pounds and stands 20 feet tall. It's been shaped and smoothed, with mortises cut at precise intervals for crossbeams. Getting it into position requires coordination, strength and patience. Lift together, steady, walk it to the foundation, slow, steady. The post rises, wobbles, finds its position over the prepared socket in the foundation stone. Slowly, with ropes and leverage, you guide it vertical. Brennus checks it with a plumb line. a simple weight on a string that reveals any deviation from true vertical. Left side, half an inch towards centre. Good, hold it there. Wooden wedges are driven into the foundation socket, locking the post in place temporarily. The process repeats for the other 3 corners, each one checked and rechecked until Brennus is satisfied. You might wonder at this level of precision, but tower construction is unforgiving. A post that's even slightly off vertical will create problems that compound with height. Walls that don't quite meet, floors that slope, structural stresses that lead to failure. Precision now prevents disaster later. The crossbeams come next, connecting the corner posts and creating the tower's skeleton. These are heavy oak timbers with tenon joints cut to fit the mortises in the corner posts. Each joint is a small marvel of carpentry, wood shaped to interlock with wood, creating connections stronger than the individual pieces. Lifting the beams into position requires teamwork and improvised engineering. A rope and pulley system is rigged, using the corner posts themselves as anchor points. You pull on the rope, feeling the weight of the beam fighting against you, and slowly it rises, swinging slightly, until Brennus and another carpenter can guide it into position. The sound when the tenon slides into the mortise is satisfying, a solid thunk that speaks of parts meeting as intended. Wooden pegs are driven through pre-drilled holes, locking the joint permanently. No nails, no metal, just wood and skill and knowledge passed down through generations. Listen to the sounds of construction. Mallets striking pegs, saws cutting through timber, the creak of ropes under load, men calling instructions to each other. It's controlled chaos, each person focused on their task but aware of the whole. Fringe fact, Roman military carpenters sometimes marked timber joints with small symbols or numbers to ensure pieces went together correctly during the assembly. This proto-assembly line thinking allowed parts to be prefabricated during good weather and then rapidly assembled when needed. Archaeological finds have revealed such marks on preserved timber from frontier forts, though whether this was standard practice or situational innovation remains debated. By midday, the tower's frame is complete up to the 2nd floor. It stands against the grey sky like a skeleton, all bones and no skin, but already you can see its potential. From the 2nd floor level, the view extends far beyond the fort's walls, across the river, into the forest beyond, toward horizons that normally remain hidden. Brennus allows you a moment to climb up and look. The ladder is temporary, rough cut and steep, but sturdy enough. You ascend carefully, feeling the frame sway slightly with your weight. Not dangerously, but enough to remind you this is a structure in process, not yet complete. From the 2nd floor platform, the world transforms. You can see the river clearly, the Danube flowing dark and cold, its edges beginning to freeze in sheltered spots. Beyond it, the forests stretch unbroken, vast and dark, hiding whatever threats might be gathering there. You might feel small up here, exposed, vulnerable. But that's not quite right. You feel aware. This is what the tower provides. Awareness, advance warning, the precious gift of time to prepare. When raiders come, and everyone says they will, these towers will see them first. Here's a historical fact. Watchtower guards used various signalling methods to communicate threats. During daylight, they could use flags or polished shields to flash reflected sunlight. At night, fires or torches provided simple but effective signals. More sophisticated systems used codes, different numbers of fires or flashes indicating different types of threats. The Roman military signalling system could transmit simple messages along a chain of towers faster than any messenger could run, creating an early warning network of impressive sophistication. The afternoon work focuses on the tower's walls. Unlike the solid timber the palisade around the fort's perimeter, the tower walls are constructed differently. Timber frame with wattle and daub infill, lighter but still effective, especially when defence comes from height and position rather than absorbing direct assault. You help weave the wattle, a basketwork of flexible branches woven between vertical stakes. Your fingers work the willow withers ins and out, over and under, creating a lattice that will hold the daub. It's almost meditative work, this weaving, the kind of task where your hands learn the pattern and your mind can drift. The willow smells fresh and green despite the season, and it's flexible enough to bend without breaking. Each section of wattle forms a panel between the timber frame members, and slowly the tower's walls take shape, transitioning from skeleton to something more substantial. The daub comes next, that familiar mixture of clay, sand, straw and water. You pack it onto the wattle from both sides, working it through the lattice so the two layers bond together. The wet daub is cold on your hands, but the work generates warmth, and soon you're comfortable despite the temperature. Feel the texture, rough straw poking through smooth clay, the wetness gradually diminishing as the material begins to set. You smooth the surface with your palms, creating walls that will dry hard and provide insulation, wind protection, and basic defence. Scholars debate the defensive value of wattle and daub construction. It won't stop a determined assault with axes or fire, but that's not really the point. Watchtowers weren't designed to hold against sustained attack. They were early warning platforms and missile positions. If the enemy reached the towers in force, something had already gone terribly wrong with the fort's defence plan. As the sun lowers, still early in these short winter days, you're back on the ground, helping construct the tower's access ladder. This will be a permanent installation, sturdier than the temporary construction ladder, with rails and properly spaced rungs. The wood has been selected carefully, oak for the rails, hardwood dowels for the rungs. Each rung is fitted into holes drilled through the rails, then pegged in place. It's simple construction, but it must be reliable. Guards will use this ladder multiple times daily, in darkness, in bad weather, possibly under stress. It can't fail. Brennus checks each rung personally, putting his full weight on it, bouncing slightly to test the connection. Only when he's satisfied does he move to the next. By the time the ladder is complete, you trust it absolutely, not because of any guarantee, but because you've watched every step of its construction and seen the care invested in each joint. The evening brings inspection. The Centurion arrives with Petronius the engineer, and they circle the tower, examining it from every angle. They climb the ladder, test the platform, check sight lines. They measure the walls with stretched cord, ensuring dimensions match the specifications. You watch from below, aware that this tower represents collective effort, your work and the work of dozens of others, all coordinated, toward a common purpose. When Petronius nods approval, you feel a quiet pride, the kind that needs no words or celebration. That night, the barrack conversations turn to what the towers mean. Someone mentions that with the new towers, the fort's visual coverage extends nearly a mile in every direction. Another points out that the signal fires atop the towers can be seen by the next fort downstream, creating a communications network along the entire frontier. Here's something quirky. Watchtower duty was simultaneously boring and essential, hours of staring at empty landscapes punctuated by moments of potentially crucial observation. Roman guards developed various ways to stay alert, rotating positions every hour, walking the platform perimeter, even elaborate games of observation, where guards would quiz each other on details of the landscape. Anything to keep the mind engaged and the eyes sharp. As you settle into sleep, you think about perspective, how the tower changes what can be seen, what can be known, what can be prepared for. The fort is becoming something more than walls and ditches. It's becoming a system, an integrated defence in depth, where each element supports the others. Outside, on the newly completed tower, guards are already at their posts. You can picture them up there, wrapped in cloaks, scanning the darkness for threats that may or may not come. Their vigilance is your security, and tomorrow you'll continue building the structures that make their work possible. The wind rattles the barrack walls, but the repairs hold. The brazier glows softly in the corner, and warmth wraps around you like a blanket. Tomorrow will bring more construction, more incremental progress toward a fort that can hold through winter. But tonight you rest knowing that the walls are rising, the towers are watching, and the work continues. The morning brings news that changes the rhythm of work. A supply caravan is expected from Carnuntum, the regional supply depot 2 days' march to the west. If it arrives before the next snowfall, and that's a significant if, the fort's winter stores will be secure. If it doesn't, rationing might become necessary by midwinter. You might not think about food much when there's enough, but on the frontier, sustenance is as important as fortification. An army that's hungry is an army that's weak, slow to respond, vulnerable. The engineers might build walls, but it's the granary that determines whether those walls will be manned by the strong soldiers or desperate, starving men. Here's a historical fact. Roman military logistics were among the most sophisticated in the ancient world. Each legionary received a daily ration of roughly 3 pounds of grain, plus smaller amounts of meat, wine or vinegar, oil and salt. Auxiliary troops received similar but slightly smaller rations. Feeding a frontier fort of 500 men required moving and storing enormous quantities of food, roughly 750 pounds of grain per day, over 11 tons, per month. Supply chains stretching hundreds of miles kept frontier forts fed, an achievement of organisation as impressive as any military victory. Today's assignment takes you to the Granary Complex, a series of structures specifically designed to keep food dry, cool and protected from pests through the long winter. You've walked past these buildings dozens of times, but never really looked at them. Now, as part of the preparation for the incoming supply caravan, you're learning how much engineering goes into something as simple as storing grain. The granary buildings sit on the fort's driest, most elevated ground, positioned to avoid any water accumulation. The head of grain storage, a grizzled quartermaster named Sextus Lucius, leads your work crew on an inspection tour. See the foundation? He points to the stone pillars that elevate the building's wooden floor about 2 feet above ground level. Airflow keeps the floor dry, prevents rot, makes it harder for rats to nest underneath. You crouch down and peer into the space beneath the granary. It's open, airy, with clear sight lines from one side to the other. You can see why this matters. Any rodent trying to burrow in would be exposed, visible, easily detected. The walls are thick timber, double-layered with an air gap between, another defence against moisture. Small vents near the roofline allow air circulation without creating openings large enough for birds or large pests. Every detail serves a purpose. Every feature addresses a specific threat to the stored food. Inside, the granary smells of dry grain and aged wood. Large ceramic vessels, dolia, sit in neat rows, each one capable of holding several hundred pounds of grain. Some contain wheat, others barley, still others beans and lentils. The diversity is deliberate. If one crop fails or spoils, others provide backup. Fringe fact: Romans recognised what we'd call the importance of crop diversity long before modern nutrition science. Military rations deliberately included variety: wheat for bread, barley for porridge and beer, legumes for protein, even occasional vegetables when available. This wasn't about gourmet dining, it was practical recognition that varied diet kept soldiers healthier than monotonous one-crop consumption. Your task today involves inspecting and rotating the stored grain. Each dolium must be opened, the grain examined for signs of weevils, mould or rodent damage, then closed and marked with the inspection date in chalk. It's tedious work, but Sextus Lucius explains why it matters. One contaminated vessel can spread to others, he says, running his hand through a batch of wheat, letting the kernels cascade through his fingers. We catch it early, we lose 1 dolium, we miss it, we could lose 10, 20, maybe more, and in winter we can't just order more grain. What we have is what we have. The grain flows through your hands like golden water, each kernel hard and dry the way it should be. You've grown so accustomed to seeing grain as flour or bread that handling it in this raw state feels almost strange, connecting you to the agricultural origins of civilization itself. You might wonder what it's like to be responsible for feeding hundreds of men for months at a time. The answer is stressful. Sextus Lucius moves through the granary with the focused attention of a man who knows that mistakes here don't just mean administrative reprimand, they mean men go hungry, morale drops, effectiveness degrades. Each dolium you inspect is a small world unto itself. Most are fine, grain dry, clean, free of pests. But occasionally you find problems, a few weevils in one vessel, requiring that the entire batch be segregated for early use before infestation spreads. A bit of moisture in another, likely from a small leak in the roof that needs immediate repair. Listen to the sounds, grain rustling as hands disturb it, the scrape of ceramic lids being moved, chalk scratching as each vessel is marked, the quiet conversation between inspectors sharing findings. It's methodical, careful work, the kind that prevents disaster through attention to small details. Here's a historical fact. Roman quartermasters kept detailed records of stores using wax tablets and later transferred to papyrus or parchment. They tracked not just quantities but also quality, source, arrival date and expected storage life. This record keeping allowed for rotation of stores using older supplies first, early detection of problems, and accurate accounting for supply requisitions. Archaeological discoveries of such records at sites like Vindolanda in Britain reveal the astonishing administrative sophistication of Roman military supply management, requisitions for specific quantities of barley, requests for boots, even birthday party invitations, all carefully documented and filed. By midday, the inspection is complete. Out of 47 dolia, 2 require immediate attention, 1 for pest infestation, 1 for moisture. It's a good ratio, Sextus tells you, better than he expected. The grain will hold through winter if the supply caravan arrives to replenish what's been consumed so far. The damaged grain isn't wasted. The weevil-infested batch will be roasted. The heat kills the insects, then ground into flour for immediate use. Soldiers joke grimly about extra protein, but bread is bread, and nothing is thrown away on the frontier. The moisture-damaged grain goes to the animals, the fort's handful of mules and the centurion's horse, who are less particular about quality. You might not realise how thin the margin is between sufficiency and shortage. The granary feels full, abundant even, but mental calculation tells you this represents perhaps 3 months of rations for the garrison, maybe 4 if supplemented with hunting and carefully managed. Beyond that, the fort depends entirely on supply lines that are increasingly unreliable as winter deepens. The afternoon brings different work, preparing storage for the incoming caravan. Additional temporary storage space must be created because the main granaries are already near capacity. The solution is to repurpose one of the barrack buildings that's being replaced by the new construction. Not ideal for long-term storage, but acceptable for a few months until consumption makes room in the proper granaries. The work involves making the building as weather-tight as possible. You spend hours chinking gaps between logs with fresh daub, repairing sections of roof where thatch has thinned, ensuring drainage channels around the foundation are clear and functional. The old barrack smells of years of habitation, smoke, leather, the ghost of countless meals. Now it's being reborn with a different purpose, transformed from shelter for men to shelter for the grain that sustains them. There's something poetic about it, though you're too busy to dwell on philosophy while packing mud into cracks. Feel the cold daub in your hands, grittier than the batch used on tower walls, heavy with sand and clay. Your fingers are numb despite the work, and the wet mixture makes them colder. But the gaps fill, the walls seal, and slowly the building becomes tight enough to protect grain from snow and rain. Fringe fact: Romans sometimes used pitch or pine tar to seal particularly stubborn gaps in storage buildings, creating a waterproof barrier that also deterred insects. The smell was strong and lingered for months, but effectiveness mattered more than comfort. Whether frontier forts had access to enough pitch for widespread use is questionable. It was valuable material also needed for military equipment maintenance and shipbuilding. As the sun sets, earlier each day now, the winter solstice approaching, you hear it. A distant call from the watchtower, then the horn blast that signals arrivals. The supply caravan has been spotted, approaching from the west, still perhaps an hour away but visible and moving steadily. The fort transforms in moments. Men emerge from buildings, officers begin shouting orders, the gates are prepared for opening. There's an energy in the air, something between excitement and relief. These supplies are coming. Winter can be faced. You're assigned to the unloading crew, which means your evening will be spent moving heavy sacks and amphorae from wagons to storage, but nobody complains. This is good work, necessary work, the kind that directly translates to survival. The caravan enters through the main gate as full darkness settles. 6 wagons, each pulled by teams of oxen that steam in the cold air, their breath creating clouds that glow in the torchlight. The wagons are laden, properly packed, and your heart lifts at the sight. Here's a historical fact. Roman supply wagons were marvels of practical engineering. The standard carus could carry roughly 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of cargo, with design features like wide wheels to distribute weight and prevent sinking in mud, iron-bound hubs for durability, and adjustable yokes to accommodate different-sized draft animals. The wagons in a military supply train were maintained to exacting standards. Broken wagons meant stranded supplies, and stranded supplies meant hungry soldiers. The first wagon carries grain, sacks of wheat, each one weighing perhaps 60 pounds, sewn shut and marked with the supply depot's seal. You and another soldier hoist a sack between you, feeling the weight settle on your shoulders, the grain shifting inside like living weight. The walk from wagon to granary is only 50 yards, but with the load on your shoulders and the footing uncertain in darkness on frost-slick ground, it feels longer. Your boots crunch on frozen earth, breath comes harder with exertion, and the sack's rough fabric scratches against your neck even through your tunic. Listen to the sounds of organised activity, men calling out, coming through as they carry loads, officers directing traffic, the creak of wagon wheels as vehicles are repositioned, oxen lowing softly, their work done for now. It's controlled chaos, everyone knowing their role, the whole fort moving like a single organism. Inside the granary, Sextus Lucius directs placement. Wheat here, stack them 4 high, mark each stack with the arrival date. His voice is calm but firm, ensuring order in the process. Each sack is positioned carefully, not just thrown. Proper stacking prevents settling damage and makes future inventory counting easier. You make trip after trip, wagon to granary, granary back to wagon. The rhythm becomes automatic. Hoist the sack, balance the weight, walk carefully, set it down precisely, return for another. Your shoulders ache, your back protests, but there's satisfaction in it too. Each sack moved is security added, winter's threat diminished by 60 pounds of grain. The second wagon carries amphorae, large ceramic vessels filled with wine, oil and garum, that fermented fish sauce Romans love and you've learned to tolerate. These require different handling, they're heavy but fragile, and a broken amphora means lost supplies and a mess to clean. You might wonder why the army ships wind hundreds of miles to a frontier fort. The answer is practical. Water quality could be unpredictable, and wine mixed with water, the typical Roman consumption method, killed many waterborne pathogens, though they didn't understand it in those terms. They just knew that wine water kept soldiers healthier than straight water often did. Plus, it improved morale, which on a frozen frontier far from home mattered enormously. The amphoras are stored in a different building, one with stone shelving specifically designed to hold them securely. Each vessel is placed carefully in its designated spot, checked for cracks or leaks, then marked in the inventory. The wine amphora smell faintly of grape and fermentation, the oil ones carry that distinctive olive scent, and the garum, well, that's an acquired smell, pungent and fishy and somehow both off-putting and appetite-inducing. The third and fourth wagons carry preserved foods, salted pork in barrels, dried fish, hard cheese wrapped in cloth, amphorae of preserved olives. These are luxuries by frontier standards, supplements to the basic grain rations that make military life more bearable. One barrel of salt pork is opened for inspection. The smell that emerges is intensely salty, the meat packed in dense brine that preserves but also overwhelms. You can see the pork inside, pale and firm, submerged in liquid so salty it would sting if it touched a cut. It's not appetizing in its raw state, but cooked into porridge or stew it provides fat and protein and flavour that makes simple grain into something approaching a meal. Scholars debate the nutritional adequacy of Roman military rations. Some argue the diet was deficient in fresh vegetables and vitamin C, potentially leading to scurvy during long winters when fresh food was unavailable. Others point out that Romans preserved certain vegetables, used herbs medicinally, and supplemented rations with hunting and foraging. The truth likely varied by location, season, and commander competence. Some garrisons ate reasonably well, others suffered deficiency diseases. The fifth wagon carries materials other than food. Iron tools to replace broken ones, nails, leather for boot repairs, wool cloth, bronze fittings, lamp oil, medical supplies. The quartermaster goes through this cargo item by item, checking against a manifest, ensuring everything ordered actually arrived. You help carry a crate of iron tools to the smithy. The crate is heavy, the metal inside clinking with each step. The smith, a massive man with burn-scarred forearms, receives the delivery with a grunt of approval, immediately opening the crate to inspect the quality. He holds up a new Delabra head, examines the metal in the firelight, nods satisfaction. "Good iron," he pronounces. "This'll hold." The final wagon carries something unexpected. A small amount of fresh food. Root vegetables that store well. Turnips, parsnips, onions, packed in straw. A few smoked hams. Apples, slightly withered, but still good. These aren't part of the standard ration, but rather the initiative of the supply master at Harnuntum, sending what he could to improve morale at a frontier fort preparing for hard winter. The gesture matters more than the quantity. Someone back at the depot thought about the men here, understood what winter on the Danube meant, and sent what comfort was possible. You might not realise how much such small kindnesses matter until you've spent months at the edge of the empire where small kindnesses are rare. The unloading continues into the night, lit by torches and lamps, the whole fort engaged in receiving and storing the supplies. It's well past midnight when the last item is secured, the last wagon emptied, the inventory accounting, reconciled. The caravan master and his teamsters are fed and given quarters for the night. They'll rest tomorrow, then begin the return journey to Carnuntum. Around a shared meal of bread and stew they bring news from the wider world. Other forts along the frontier are also preparing for winter. Barbarian activity has been quiet recently, perhaps because they're preparing too. The governor is concerned but confident in the frontier's defences. Here's something quirky. Supply caravans became unofficial news networks, carrying information between isolated frontier posts. Caravan masters were often questioned extensively about conditions on the road, activities in other forts, rumours from the provincial capital. In an age before rapid communication, these travelling supply trains were literally the bearers of news, and their arrivals were social events as much as logistical necessities. You finally return to the barrack well after midnight, exhausted but satisfied. The fort's stores are replenished, winter can be faced with confidence, and the work of building can continue without the shadow of potential shortage hanging over it. The barrack is warm, someone kept the brazier fed, and dark except for the coal's glow. You strip off your outer tunic, smelling of grain dust and lamp smoke and honest sweat, and collapse onto your cot. Around you men are already snoring, but a few are still awake, talking quietly about the supplies, calculating how long they'll last, discussing the fresh apples with the enthusiasm of men who haven't tasted fruit in weeks. You pull your blanket up, feeling the familiar scratch of wool, the weight settling comforting over you. Outside, guards walk their rounds, the oxen are being fed and stabled, and the supplies sit secure in their designated storage, representing months of labour by farmers, millers, merchants and teamsters that culminate in survival for men at the Empire's edge. Before sleep takes you, you think about the interconnected systems that make this frontier defence possible. It's not just walls and ditches and watchtowers. It's grain fields hundreds of miles away, worked by farmers you'll never meet. It's wagons maintained by craftsmen in distant workshops. It's amphora makers, salt merchants, wine producers, all contributing to a system so vast and complex it's almost incomprehensible. And yet it works. The supplies arrive, the soldiers eat, the walls rise and the empire holds. Tomorrow will bring more building, more preparation, more incremental progress toward a fort that can hold through whatever winter brings. But tonight, with a full granary and a warm barrack, sleep comes easy. You wake to absolute soberness, the kind that feels heavy, that presses against your ears like physical weight. Something is different, and it takes your sleep-fogged mind a moment to understand what. The wind has stopped. You might not think silence is alarming, but on the frontier you've learned that every change in pattern carries meaning. The wind has been constant for weeks, and its sudden absence feels ominous, like the held breath before a shout. Outside, the world has transformed. Snow fell during the night, not the dusting of a few days ago, but serious snow, the kind that changes everything. It lies thick and pristine, smoothing the fort's angular geometry into soft curves, muffling sound, reflecting the pre-dawn dimness with an eerie luminescence. Here's a historical fact. Winter weather dramatically affected Roman military operations. Snow and ice could halt campaigns, freeze supply lines, and transform defensive considerations. Commanders on northern frontiers became amateur meteorologists by necessity, learning to read weather signs and plan accordingly. Historical records describe careful attention to seasonal patterns, with construction and supply operations timed to complete before severe weather made work impossible or dangerous. You dress quickly. The barrack is colder than usual despite the brazier, and step outside into a transformed landscape. The snow comes up past your ankles, and each step is an effort, breaking through the surface crust into softer powder beneath. Your breath plumes white in the still air, and the cold bites at exposed skin with the new intensity. The fort is slowly coming to life, but the usual morning sounds are muffled, absorbed by the snow blanket. Voices seem to come from far away even when people are close. Footsteps are silent except for the crunch of breaking snow crust. It's beautiful in an alien way, this softened world of white and grey, but the beauty carries a warning. You walk toward the wall, toward the river, and even before you reach the rampart, you know what you'll see. The Danube is freezing, Not fully, not yet, but the ice extends from both banks now, reaching toward the centre like grasping fingers. The open water in the middle looks dark and threatening, flowing swiftly, but every day the ice will extend further. Every night of cold will narrow that gap. You might feel your stomach tighten at the sight. This is what every preparation has been leading toward. The moment when the river stops being a barrier and becomes a bridge. When whatever waits in the forest beyond can walk across to test everything you've built. Listen to the river's changed voice. No longer the constant liquid flow, but something quieter, more restrained. The ice makes subtle grinding sounds as it shifts, expands, encounters resistance. It's the sound of transformation, of water becoming solid, of barriers becoming paths. On the rampart you're not alone. Other men stand watching the river, measuring the ice extent with experienced eyes. The centurion is there too, his face unreadable, but you see the tension in his shoulders. 2 weeks, someone mutters. Maybe 3. Less, another voice counters. Look how fast it's formed. Next cold snap, it'll close completely. The conversation is quiet, matter of fact. No panic, no dramatics. Just soldiers assessing a situation with professional detachment. But underneath, you sense the same tension you feel. The awareness that time is running out, that the building must accelerate, that ready or not, winter is here. Here's a fringe fact. Ice thickness was measured using long poles marked with gradations, similar to depth soundings for water. Experienced soldiers could estimate ice load-bearing capacity based on thickness. A few inches might support a man, 6 inches could hold a horse, 12 inches or more could support wagons and siege equipment. This knowledge was literally life and death information for both defenders trying to predict attack timing and attackers planning their approach. The morning briefing in the Principia is quick and focused. The chief engineer Petronius points to the fort's plan, indicating remaining work. The north wall is complete, the towers are functional, the granaries are full, good. He pauses, letting the accomplishments register before moving to what remains. The riverside ditch is only half depth in 2 sections. The eastern gate reinforcement isn't finished. The caltrop fields aren't laid, and we haven't provisioned the watchtowers for extended occupation. The tasks sound endless, but you've learned enough to know they're achievable if the weather holds. That's always the qualification, if the weather holds. Priority today is the ditch completion, Petronius continues. Full depth, full width, proper angles. If we get another snowfall before it's done, we'll be digging through snow to reach frozen earth. Better to finish it now. You're assigned to ditch crew again. Your muscles remember the work from before and protest preemptively. But you collect your delabra and join the team heading to the unfinished section. The ditch work is harder now. The earth is partially frozen, requiring real force to break it apart. Each swing of the delabra jars your arms, and progress is measured in inches rather than feet. The snow makes footing treacherous, and you have to clear it away before you can even reach the earth beneath. Feel the impact travelling up your arms with each strike. Metal hitting resistant earth, shock absorbing through handle to hands to wrists to elbows to shoulders. It's punishing work, and you understand viscerally why armies throughout history have struggled with winter engineering. But the work continues, because it must. One swing, then another, then another. Dirt and ice chips fly with each impact. Your section of ditch deepens slowly, the spoil pile growing as frozen earth is broken apart and hauled away. Scholars debate the effectiveness of winter fortification work. Some argue the difficulty of working frozen ground meant most defensive preparations had to be completed in autumn, with winter work limited to maintenance and minor improvements. Others point to archaeological evidence of winter construction at frontier, forts suggesting Romans had techniques and determination to build even in harsh conditions. The truth likely depended on specific circumstances. Urgent threat could motivate work that would otherwise be postponed to spring. By midday, despite the cold and difficult conditions, the first section of ditch reaches full depth. The engineers measure, verify, approve. It's a small victory, but it feels significant. One more section complete, one more piece of the defensive system in place. The second section proves even more difficult. The earth here has more clay content, and frozen clay is nearly as hard as stone. Progress slows to a crawl. Men take turns swinging, because arms and shoulders fatigue quickly with the impact forces. You work in rotations, 10 minutes of digging, 5 minutes of rest, rotating through the crew. During a rest break you stand at the ditch edge looking toward the river. The ice has advanced noticeably even since morning. By sunset it might close completely, turning the Danube from waterway to highway. You might wonder what the barbarians are doing right now in their settlements beyond the river. Preparing to, probably, gathering weapons, organising warbands, waiting for the ice to become strong enough to support their crossing. They face their own challenges, feeding their people through winter, protecting their own communities, responding to their own pressures and threats. It's strange to think of them as people rather than an abstract threat, but they are, men with families, with fears and hopes, with their own reasons for doing what they do. That doesn't make them less dangerous, perhaps makes them more so, because desperate humans are capable of terrible things. Here's a historical fact. The barbarians who threatened Rome's frontiers were diverse peoples with complex societies, not mindless savages. Germanic tribes had sophisticated social structures, skilled craftspeople, agricultural knowledge, and military traditions. Many had extensive contact with Rome through trade, diplomacy, and service in auxiliary military units. The conflicts along the frontier weren't civilization versus barbarism, but rather complex interactions between different societies competing for resources, security, and survival. The afternoon brings a change in temperature. It warms slightly, just enough that the snow begins to soften, becoming wet and heavy. This makes the ditch work even messier. The spoil is now a mix of frozen earth and slush, heavier and more difficult to move, but there's a benefit. The slightly warmer earth is easier to break apart. Progress accelerates, and by late afternoon, the second section of ditch approaches completion. Muscles scream, hands are raw inside their gloves, but the work is nearly done. The final measurements are taken as light begins to fade. Petronius himself comes to verify. 10 feet deep, 12 feet across, walls as close to vertical as the soil will maintain. He nods, makes mark on his tablet, and pronounces it acceptable. Good work, this section is complete. Those simple words carry weight. Another piece finished, another element of the defensive system in place. You climb out of the ditch for the final time, your legs shaking with fatigue, and look at what the crew has accomplished. It's just a hole in the ground, really. Unglamorous, muddy, brutally functional. But it's also a barrier, an obstacle, something that will slow attackers and cost them lives if they try to cross. Feel the satisfaction of completed work. Muscles exhausted but proud, hands sore but capable, mind tired but clear. This is what you were sent to the frontier to do, not glory in battle, but the hard, unglamorous work of building defences that prevent battles from being necessary. The evening meal that night tastes better than usual, though it's the same barley porridge and bread as always. Your body is depleting its reserves, burning energy to stay warm and fuel the constant physical labour, and every calorie is welcome. Around the mess hall, conversation is subdued. Everyone is tired, but there's also an undercurrent of awareness. The river is freezing. The preparations are nearly complete. Soon, perhaps very soon, the waiting will end and the testing will begin. Here's something quirky. Roman soldiers developed superstitions about ice formation timing. Some believed that ice closing on a full moon meant a mild winter ahead. Ice closing on a new moon meant harsh weather to come. Others watched how birds behaved as the river froze, interpreting their patterns as omens. Educated officers might have scoffed at such beliefs, but among the common soldiers, these small attempts to predict and control the unpredictable future were common and, in their way, comforting. After the meal, you're assigned to evening watch, 2 hours on the North Tower, the newly completed structure you helped build days ago. The tower is cold but solid, and climbing the ladder in darkness requires care, each rung slick with frost. At the top, the platform is small, maybe 6 feet square, with wooden walls waist high and firing slits at intervals. Another soldier is already there, a veteran named Marcus, who served on the frontier for 15 years. He nods as you arrive but doesn't speak immediately, and you settle into the watch routine. From this height, the view is expansive despite the darkness. Starlight reflects off the snow, creating just enough illumination to see shapes and movement. The river gleams dully where ice has formed, and the dark line of open water in the centre looks like a wound not yet healed. The forest beyond is a wall of darkness, impenetrable to sight. Anything could be out there. A single scout, a raiding party, an entire army, and you'd never know until they moved into the open. Listen to the night sounds, the distant call of an owl. Wind beginning to stir again, the silence didn't last. The creak of the tower as it settles, your own breath and Marcus's. It's almost peaceful, in a cold, vigilant way. Marcus finally speaks, his voice quiet. 15th winter for me on this frontier, 15th time watching the river freeze. You wait, sensing he has more to say. Every year, I wonder if this will be the year it all comes apart. The year they come in force we can't stop, or the supplies don't arrive, or the cold breaks us before the enemy does. He pauses. And every year, somehow, we make it through to spring. You might ask if he's scared, but the question seems unnecessary. Of course he's scared. Fear is rational when facing real danger. The question isn't whether to fear, but how to function despite it. The trick, Marcus continues, is not thinking too far ahead. Don't think about the whole winter, the whole watch rotation, all the things that could go wrong. Just think about your next 2 hours. Just focus on watching your section, staying alert, doing your job. Link enough 2-hour segments together, and suddenly it's spring. It's advice from experience, the distilled wisdom of 15 winters survived. You file it away, knowing you'll need it in the weeks ahead. The watch passes slowly. Time always does when you're cold and are waiting. But eventually your relief arrives and you climb down the ladder, muscles stiff from standing in the cold. The barrack is warm and dark and you navigate to your cot by memory and feel. Around you, men sleep in various states of restlessness. Someone mutters in their sleep. Another shifts position with a creak of wood and rustle of blankets. You strip off your outer layers, hang your cloak on its peg and slide under your blanket. The cold seems to have soaked into your bones, and it takes time for body heat to warm the small cocoon of your bed. Outside, the night continues. Guards walk their rounds. The river freezes increment by increment, and winter tightens its grip on the frontier. But inside these wooden walls, with food in storage and defences in place, there's a fragile security. Tomorrow might bring the ice closing completely. Tomorrow might bring the first test of everything you've built. Or tomorrow might be another day of preparation, another day of building, another day borrowed before the reckoning comes. You fall asleep not knowing which it will be, but knowing that whatever comes, you've done the work, built what could be built, and prepared as well as possible. The walls stand, the towers watch, the granaries are full, and that for tonight is enough. Morning breaks grey and cold, the sun hidden behind thick clouds that promise more snow. You wake to the sound you've been half dreading, the horn blast that signals assembly, not the usual morning muster, but the pattern that means something has changed. You might feel your heart rate increase before you're fully awake, adrenaline responding to a signal your conscious mind is still processing. Around you, men are moving quickly, reaching for clothes and equipment with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who've drilled this response countless times. Outside, the fort is already in motion. You join the flow of men heading toward the north wall, the river wall, and you know before you arrive what you'll see. The Danube has frozen completely. The dark line of open water that remained yesterday is gone, replaced by an unbroken sheet of ice stretching from bank to bank. In the early morning dimness, it glows with a faint luminescence, snow-covered and solid, and utterly changed from the flowing barrier that protected the fort for months. Here's a historical fact. Complete river freezing transformed the strategic situation along Rome's northern frontiers. Military commanders maintained records of freeze dates, noting patterns across years to predict when defences needed to shift from river-based to land-based configurations. Historical documents describe the closing of the river as a moment of elevated alert, triggering specific defensive protocols including increased patrols, heightened watch rotations, and restriction of non-essential activities outside the fort. The centurion is already on the wall scanning the far bank with practiced eyes. Other officers join him, and you can see the consultation happening, pointing, discussing, assessing. After a few minutes he turns to address the assembled soldiers. The river is closed. From this moment we assume threat level is elevated. Watch rotations double, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. No one leaves the fort without authorization and escort. Weapons stay accessible at all times, even during work details. His voice is calm, authoritative, carrying the weight of experience. We've prepared for this. Trust the walls, trust your training, trust each other. Dismiss to assignments. The briefing is short because there's no need for elaboration. Everyone knows what the frozen river means, what protocols it triggers, what comes next. You're assigned to patrol duty, walking the fort's perimeter wall, maintaining visual surveillance of approaches, watching for any signs of movement in the landscape beyond. It's cold work, exposed work, but necessary work. The wall walk is a wooden platform running behind the palisade, just wide enough for two men to pass each other comfortably. Every 20 feet or so, there's a gap between logs providing a sightline toward the exterior. These are the positions you'll cycle through during your patrol, spending a few minutes at each, scanning your designated sector before moving to the next. You start at the northwest corner tower, where the new construction meets the old wall. The platform here is still fresh timber, smelling of cut wood and pine tar used to seal the joints. The footing is solid, secure, and you feel the quality of the construction you helped build. From this position, your view encompasses the river and the forest beyond. The ice looks thick, pristine except for wind-blown snow patterns creating subtle textures across its surface. The far bank is perhaps 200 yards away, its trees dark against the snow, and between here and there, nothing. No movement, no threats, just frozen emptiness. You might feel the tension of watching, the way your eyes strain to detect movement where there is none. The way your mind starts creating shapes from shadows and tree branches is the hardest part of guard duty, staying alert when nothing is happening, maintaining focus when your brain craves stimulus. Listen to the sounds around you. Wind whistling through gaps in the palisade logs, the creak of timber as the fort settles and responds to temperature changes, distant voices from inside the fort's interior, the rhythmic crunch of another guard's footsteps on an adjacent section of wall. These sounds become your companions, familiar markers of normalcy. Here's a fringe fact. Roman guards used various techniques to stay alert during long, monotonous watches. Some created mental games, counting specific types of trees or memorizing landscape features. Others recited poetry or prayers silently, giving their minds something to process while eyes remained vigilant. Archaeological finds include small gaming pieces and dice that guards carried, possibly for quick games during breaks that kept minds sharp without causing distraction from duties. Every 20 minutes, measured by the water clock in the nearest tower, you move to the next observation position. The rotation keeps you moving, prevents the dangerous stillness that leads to cold injury and mental drift. Each position offers a slightly different view, a different sector to monitor, keeping your attention engaged. At the third position, you're joined briefly by the Optio making his rounds, checking on each guard position, ensuring alertness and readiness. He pauses beside you, looking out over the ice. "See anything?" "Nothing, sir. No movement, no tracks, nothing." He nods but doesn't seem reassured. "They're out there. They know the ice closed, probably watching it as carefully as we were. Question is whether they move immediately or wait for it to thicken more." You might ask how thick the ice is now, but he anticipates the question. Engineers estimate 6 to 8 inches based on the cold duration and water flow rates. Enough for men on foot, risky for horses, definitely not enough for wagons. He pauses. Give it another week of this cold, it'll support cavalry, 2 weeks, full equipment. The calculation is grimly practical. Less ice means lighter forces, which the fort can likely handle. More ice means heavier forces, larger threats, more dangerous engagements. "Stay sharp," he says, then continues his rounds, leaving you alone with the view and the cold and the waiting. The morning stretches into afternoon, measured not by the sun, still hidden behind clouds, but by the subtle change in light quality, the gradual shift from dim to less dim and back toward dim again. Winter days this far north are cruel in their brevity, the sun's path so low and short that true daylight seems like an afterthought. Your watch rotation ends, and you're relieved by the next shift. Climbing down from the wall, your legs are stiff, your face numb from cold despite the wool scarf wrapped around it. Your eyes feel dry and strained from hours of focused watching. The afternoon brings different duties. Weapons maintenance. In the relative warmth of the barrack, you join others in the ritual care of military equipment that keeps soldiers alive. Your gladius comes first, the short sword that is Rome's signature weapon. You draw it from its scabbard and examine the blade in the lamplight. The steel is clean, properly oiled from the last maintenance session, showing no signs of rust or damage. But maintenance isn't just about fixing problems, it's about preventing them. Feel the blade's weight in your hand, balanced, purposeful, the craftsmanship evident in every line. This isn't crude iron pounded into shape, but quality steel folded and worked by smiths who understood their craft. The edge, when you test it carefully with your thumb, is sharp enough to shave hair. You begin with a whetstone, the fine-grained type used for finishing rather than major sharpening. Oil goes on the stone first, not much, just enough to carry away the tiny metal particles the sharpening creates. Then the blade, drawn across the stone at a precise angle, the movement as much muscle memory as conscious thought. Listen to the sound, the whisper of steel on stone, rhythmic and meditative. Other men around you are doing the same work, and the collective sound creates a subtle music, the song of preparation, of warriors maintaining their tools. Here's a historical fact. Roman military equipment maintenance was not optional or left to individual initiative. It was mandatory and regularly inspected. Officers conducted periodic gear inspections, and soldiers with poorly maintained equipment faced punishment. This wasn't arbitrary discipline, but practical recognition that combat effectiveness depended on reliable gear. A rusty sword, a cracked shield, a loose sandal strap, any of these could mean the difference between life and death in battle. After the gladius comes the puyo, the dagger that serves as backup weapon and utility tool. It receives the same careful attention: inspection, sharpening, oiling. The leather of its sheath is checked for cracks or brittleness, treated with oil to keep it supple in the cold. Your armour, the lorica segmentata with its overlapping steel strips, requires different maintenance. Each segment must move freely while remaining securely attached. You check the leather straps that hold the plates together, looking for wear or stretching. One strap shows signs of strain and is replaced with a new one from the repair kit every soldier maintains. The metal plates themselves are oiled, to prevent rust, wiped clean of any moisture or dirt that accumulated during use. Your hands move over each plate, feeling for damage, for the rough spots that indicate developing rust, for any weakness that could compromise protection. You might not think of armour maintenance as interesting, but there's a satisfaction to it. The knowledge that your survival might depend on catching a worn strap now before it fails when you need it most. Every rivet checked, every strap tested, every plate oiled is a small investment in your own future. Fringe fact. Roman soldiers sometimes personalised their equipment with scratched inscriptions, names, unit designations, good luck phrases, even crude jokes. Archaeological finds have revealed armour pieces marked with their owners' names, probably to prevent theft or mix-ups, and occasional religious invocations to protective deities. Whether this was officially sanctioned or quietly tolerated varies, but it represents the very human need to make impersonal military equipment somehow personal. The work continues through the afternoon, checking caligae, the hobnailed sandals, for loose nails, treating leather with oil, examining the scutum shield, for damage to its layered wood construction or loosening of the metal boss. It's meditative work, giving hands and mind something to focus on while the fort maintains its elevated alert status. Outside, guards watch the frozen river. Inside, soldiers prepare the tools of their trade should watching turn to fighting. As evening approaches, the snow that threatened all day finally begins to fall. Not heavy, but steady. Small flakes that drift down endlessly, accumulating silently on every surface. The world contracts, visibility reducing as the snow thickens the air. The evening meal is served early, ensuring everyone eats before the watch rotations complicate scheduling. The food is hot. A thick stew of barley, lentils and salt pork with fresh bread that's still warm from the oven. After a day of cold duty and maintenance work, it tastes magnificent. You eat slowly, savouring each bite, feeling the warmth spread from your belly outward. Around you, conversation is subdued. Everyone is tired from the heightened alert status, from doubled watches, from the low-level tension that comes from knowing the river is frozen, and threats could materialise at any time. Scholars debate the psychological impact of frontier garrison duty, particularly during winter when isolation was most severe and threat levels highest. Some historical accounts describe low morale, disciplinary problems, and even mutinies at poorly commanded forts. Others document remarkable unit cohesion and effectiveness. The difference often came down to leadership. Officers who maintained routine, enforced standards, but also showed genuine care for their men's welfare could sustain morale through months of difficulty. Those who didn't often presided over disintegrating units. After the meal, you have a brief rest period before your next watch rotation. You use the time to write a letter home, or to where home used to be. The wax tablet is cold, the stylus awkward in stiff fingers, but you scratch out a few lines anyway. The words are simple: you're well, the fort is strong, winter has arrived, you think of them. Nothing about the frozen river or the threats it enables, nothing to cause worry, just connection, the thin thread that links you to a life that feels increasingly distant and unreal. You might wonder if the letter will ever be sent. The supply caravans have stopped for winter, and mail service is suspended until spring. But you write anyway, because the act itself matters. The reminder that you exist beyond this frozen frontier, that you're more than a soldier in a fort waiting for an attack that may or may not come. The letter finished, you seal the tablet and store it with others written over the months. A stack of unsent messages, a diary of sorts, proof that you lived and thought and felt even in this remote place. Evening watch assignment comes too soon. You dress in layers, tunic, then wool under tunic, then the sagum cloak, then an additional fur-lined cloak issued for winter watch duty. Wool scarf, leather gloves, extra foot wraps inside your caligae. You look bulky and feel restricted, but the cold doesn't care about mobility or appearance. This watch takes you to the eastern wall away from the river, overlooking the landward approaches. The snowfall has intensified, creating a curtain of white that limits visibility to perhaps 50 yards. Beyond that, everything dissolves into swirling grey-white nothing. The watch is longer tonight, 4 hours instead of 2, and lonelier. The snow creates isolation, cutting you off from even the nearby guards whose presence you could sense before. You're alone in a small bubble of visibility, surrounded by falling snow and darkness and the unknown. Listen to the silence of snowfall, not true silence, but the soft whisper of flakes landing on wood, on stone, on already fallen snow. It absorbs other sounds, creating an acoustic cocoon that's both peaceful and unnerving. Staying alert is harder tonight. The limited visibility makes watching seem futile. You can't see threats until they're dangerously close, so why strain your eyes into the swirling white? But that's exactly when discipline matters most, when vigilance feels pointless but remains essential. You move through your patrol positions mechanically, training overriding the part of your brain that wants to just huddle against the wall and wait for relief. At each position, you stop, scan your sector thoroughly, and listen. Visibility might be limited, but sound still travels, and attackers moving through snow make noise. The hours crawl past, your feet go numb despite the extra wrapping, your face aches from the cold. Snow accumulates on your shoulders and the folds of your cloak, and periodically you have to brush it off to prevent the weight from building. Here's a historical fact. Cold weather injuries, frostbite, hypothermia, trench foot were serious concerns for frontier garrisons. Roman military medical texts describe treatments for cold injuries and prevention measures, including layered clothing, regular rotation of guards to prevent excessive exposure, warm drinks for watch personnel, and careful monitoring by officers for signs of cold injury. Despite these precautions, some soldiers still suffered permanent damage from winter duty, a grim price of frontier defence. Halfway through the watch, the Optio appears through the snow like a ghost, checking on you. "All quiet." "Nothing, sir. Can't see more than 50 feet in this snow." He nods, stamps his feet to restore circulation. Another hour the snow should lighten. Weather patterns suggest this will pass. He offers a small flask. Warm wine, just a sip. The wine is heated, spiced with something, cinnamon maybe, and the sip burns warmly down your throat. It's a small mercy, but significant. The Optio continues his rounds, disappearing back into the snow, and you're alone again. True to his prediction, the snowfall does lighten as the watch continues. The curtain of white thins, visibility extending to 100 yards, then more. The clouds begin to break up, and between them stars appear. Hard, cold, brilliant points of light that seem to emphasize rather than relieve the darkness. With better visibility comes renewed vigilance. You scan the landscape carefully, looking for any irregularity in the snow-covered terrain, any shadow that might be movement, any sign that you're not alone in the night. Nothing. Just snow and darkness, and the patient watching that is a soldier's lot. The relief arrives finally, 4 hours that felt like 8, and you climb down from the wall with muscles stiff and joints aching. In the barrack, you strip off the layers of cold-soaked clothing, hanging them near the brazier to dry. The warmth of the room feels almost painful against cold-numbed skin, but gradually sensation returns. You slide into your cot without even removing your inner tunic, too tired for the usual preparations. The blanket is cold initially, but body heat warms it quickly. creating a cocoon of relative comfort. Around you, men sleep in the shifts allowed by the watch rotation. Some are heading out as you're coming in, and you exchange nods of mutual sympathy. This is the rhythm now. Watch, rest, eat, maintain equipment, watch again, over and over until spring comes or circumstances change. Before sleep claims you, you think about the ice, solid now, passable, transforming the Danube from ally to neutral ground. Somewhere across that ice, others are making their own preparations, their own decisions, moving toward confrontations or away from them, based on calculations you can't know, but the walls stand. The watches are maintained. The fort is ready. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. The morning arrives with brittle clarity. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world encased in snow and ice. The sky is painfully blue, the sun bright but offering no warmth, just harsh light that reflects off the snow until your eyes water. You might welcome the clear weather after yesterday's snow-obscured gloom, but clarity brings its own challenges. If you can see clearly, so can anyone watching the fort from across the frozen river. Today's work takes you outside the walls. A calculated risk, but necessary. The defensive field systems aren't complete, and with the river frozen, completing them becomes urgent. Here's a historical fact. Roman defensive engineering extended well beyond fort walls. Sophisticated obstacle systems created defensive depth, slowing and channeling attackers into killing zones where defenders held advantage. These included ditches, earthworks, sharpened stakes, sipi, and caltrops, iron devices with 4 spikes arranged so one always pointed upward, regardless of how it landed. Scattered in approaches to walls, caltrops were brutally effective against both foot soldiers and cavalry, causing injuries that might not kill immediately, but rendered fighters' combat ineffective. The work party assembles at the main gate. 20 soldiers, fully armed despite the work focus, plus 2 archers who'll maintain overwatch from the wall. The centurion briefs you quickly. We're laying caltrops in the approach fields north and east of the fort. Work in pairs, stay within sight of the walls, and if the alarm sounds, drop everything and return immediately. Speed is important, but survival is more important. Understood? The acknowledgement is collective and subdued. Everyone understands the risks of working outside the walls with threat levels elevated. The gates open, massive timber barriers swinging inward, and the work party files out. The transition from inside to outside feels significant, from protected to exposed, from relative safety to calculated risk. The snow outside is pristine, unmarked except for a few animal tracks. Rabbit or fox, hard to tell. Your boots break through the frozen crust with each step, sinking several inches into powder beneath. Progress is slow, laborious, each step an effort. The caltrops are carried in leather bags, each device carefully wrapped to prevent the iron spikes from tangling or damaging the bags. You're partnered with a soldier named Gaius, a quiet man from Hispania who's been on the frontier almost as long as Marcus. Your assignment is to scatter caltrops in a designated field section about 70 yards from the wall, far enough that attackers encounter them before reaching missile range, close enough that you can retreat quickly if needed. The work is simple in concept. Walk a patternist across the field, periodically dropping caltrops in semi-random placement dense enough to create a hazard, but sparse enough to make the supply last across the wall. Full defensive zone. You might think it's straightforward, but there's skill involved. Too regular, and attackers might spot the pattern and navigate around it. Too random, and you create gaps large enough to pass through safely. The ideal is organised randomness, appearing chaotic but actually providing consistent coverage. Gaius demonstrates the technique. 3 steps, drop a caltrop, 2 steps, drop another, 5 steps another, varying the count, varying the pattern, but maintaining average density. Don't think too hard about it, he advises. Just feel the rhythm. You begin pulling caltrops from your bag and placing them in the snow. Each device is surprisingly heavy, solid iron, 4 spikes radiating from a central point, each spike wickedly sharp and angled to penetrate leather or flesh. Feel the cold metal in your gloved hands. Dense, purposeful, designed for a single grim function. You place each caltrop carefully, not thrown, which might create visible disturbances, but set and then partially covered with snow. Visible enough to be effective, hidden enough to not be obviously avoided. Listen to the sounds, your breath heavy with exertion from moving through deep snow. The soft crunch of footsteps, the whisper of wind across the open field, the distant calls of guards on the wall maintaining watch over your work. Here's a fringe fact. Caltrops were expensive and time-consuming to produce, requiring skilled smith work to create the precisely angled spikes. Frontier forts couldn't afford to scatter thousands randomly. They had to be strategic, focusing on likely approach routes and areas where channeling attackers served defensive purposes. After battles or threat periods, work parties would often recover caltrops for reuse, a grimy task that involved searching through snow, mud, and sometimes blood to reclaim the valuable iron devices. The work continues across the morning. Your bag lightens as the caltrops are distributed, and the field gradually becomes lethal to anyone attempting to cross it quickly. From a distance it looks unchanged, just a snow-covered field, but beneath that innocent white surface lies a grid of iron teeth. Halfway through the morning the alarm sounds, not the full attack warning, but the alert pattern that means potential threat spotted. Your heart rate spikes, and you turn toward the fort already moving. "Back to the wall, now!" The centurion's voice carries across the field and the work party abandons everything, moving as quickly as the snow allows us toward the gates. You might feel the vulnerability intensely now, 70 yards from safety, weighed down by equipment and heavy clothing, moving through snow that fights every step. The wall seems impossibly distant, and your mind populates the forest with threats even though you can't see anything. The run, more of a struggling fast walk through the snow, seems to take forever. Your breath comes hard, lungs burning with cold air, legs screaming from the effort of pushing through resistance with each step. The gates are open and guards are waving you in urgently. You pile through the opening, and the moment the last man clears the threshold, the gates swing shut with a massive thud that vibrates through the ground. Inside, you bend over, hands on knees, gasping for breath. Around you, others do the same. When you finally look up, seeking explanation, the centurion is there. Movement spotted across the river. Couldn't confirm numbers or intent, but protocol requires we pull back exposed personnel. His voice is calm, controlled. We wait 30 minutes. If nothing develops, we resume work. The 30 minutes stretches interminably. You wait in the area behind the gate, equipment still on, ready to either return to work or respond to attack. The tension is different from watch duty. More acute, more immediate, the possibility of action hanging heavy in the air. But nothing develops. The watchtowers report no further movement. Whatever was seen, if anything was actually there beyond shadows and nerves, doesn't materialize into threat. "Back to work," the centurion orders, and the gates open again. The return to the field is psychologically harder than the first exit. You've been reminded viscerally of the danger, of how exposed you are out here, and walking back into that exposure requires conscious overriding of instinct. But you do it, because it's the work, because it needs doing, because this is what soldiers do, calculate acceptable risks and then accept them. The caltrop distribution continues. Your section of field is completed, and you move to the next designated area. The pattern repeats. Walk, drop, gradually building the defensive barrier that might save lives in days or weeks to come. By midday, the work is complete. Hundreds of caltrops have been distributed across the approach fields, creating a hazard that any attacking force will have to navigate or clear before reaching the walls. It's not impenetrable. Determined attackers could clear paths or simply accept casualties crossing it, but it slows, disrupts, and causes damage. In battle, that might be enough. The work party returns to the fort and the gates close behind you with finality. Back inside the walls, the sense of relief is palpable. You've been exposed vulnerable, and now you're not. The psychological shift is immediate and powerful. The afternoon brings maintenance work on the gate itself, those massive timber barriers that represent the fort's most vulnerable point. Gates must open to allow movement, which means they're inherently weaker than solid walls. Compensating for this requires engineering and attention. You join the detail examining the gate mechanism, the massive iron hinges that support each door's weight, the reinforcing bands that prevent splitting, the bar mechanism that locks the gates closed. The chief carpenter Brenner supervises, checking each element methodically. "Gates are where forts fall," he says, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "Walls can be climbed maybe, but it's slow. Gates can be opened and then it's over." He points out the multiple security layers. The main bar, thick as a man's thigh. that slides into sockets on both sides of the gate frame, the secondary bars that reinforce the first, the reinforcing timbers that distribute the force of any ram attack, even the murder holes above, openings through which defenders can drop or throw projectiles onto anyone attempting to force the gate. Feel the weight of the main bar as you help remove it for inspection. Oak, iron-bound, almost too heavy for 4 men to lift comfortably. This is what stands between order and chaos when attackers reach the gates. The inspection reveals wear, inevitable given daily opening and closing cycles. The iron reinforcing bands show stress cracks at one bolt point. The wood where the hinges attach has compressed slightly from the constant weight. Small issues now, but potentially catastrophic if left unaddressed. We reinforce here, Brennus indicates, marking the problem areas with chalk. New bolts, additional iron strapping, and we treat the hinge points with oil. Keeps the metal from binding in cold weather. You might not think about how cold affects metal, but iron becomes brittle in extreme temperatures, more prone to cracking under stress. A gate that swings smoothly in summer can freeze solid in winter, or worse, shatter when force is applied. The repair work begins immediately. New iron straps are heated in the smithy until they're workable, then shaped to fit the gate's contours. You can smell the hot metal, sharp, almost electric, and hear the rhythmic hammering as smiths work the iron to the required curves. While the metal heats, you help prepare the gate surface, cleaning away dirt and ice from the areas receiving new straps, drilling pilot holes to prevent the wood from splitting when bolts are driven through. The drill is a simple bow drill, rotated by pulling a cord wrapped around the shaft. It's slow work, and the smell of wood dust mingles with the metallic scent from the smithy. Each hole must be precisely placed, aligned with the strap bolt patterns, deep enough for solid purchase but not so deep as to weaken the timber. Listen to the sounds layering around you, the drill's rhythmic squeak, hammers on iron from the smithy, guards changing watch on the walls, someone singing, badly but enthusiastically, from the direction of the barracks. Life continues, work continues, the fort's heartbeat steady despite the threats beyond the walls. Here's a historical fact. Roman military blacksmiths were highly valued specialists who could repair everything from armour and weapons to complex mechanisms like gate hinges and lock systems. Each legion had a fabrici workshop staffed by skilled metallurgists who understood not just how to work iron, but how different treatments affected its properties. Quenching techniques, carbon content adjustments, tempering processes, these weren't mysterious arts but practical knowledge passed through apprenticeship and experience. The hot iron straps arrive from the smithy, glowing dull red, and are quickly positioned on the gate. You can feel the heat radiating from them even through your gloves. Bolts are driven through the pre-drilled holes, and you watch as Brennus uses a copper hammer, softer than iron, less likely to damage the bolt heads, to set each one firmly. The metal cools quickly in the winter air, shifting from red to black, contracting as it cools and gripping the wood tighter. It's almost alive, this transformation from malleable to rigid, from soft glowing to hard cold. The hinges receive attention next. Cleaned, inspected for cracks, then thoroughly oiled with a mixture of animal fat and pine resin that won't freeze solid even in severe cold. You work the oil into the hinge pins, feeling the resistance ease as the lubricant penetrates, smoothing the metal-on-metal contact. As you work, a thought strikes you. Every element of the fort exists in relationship to every other element. The walls mean nothing without gates to allow movement. The gates mean nothing without strong walls preventing bypass. The watchtowers extend the value of both walls and gates by providing advance warning. The caltrops you placed this morning create another layer, forcing attackers to slow before reaching the gates and walls. It's a system, integrated and interdependent, stronger as a whole than the sum of individual parts. Scholars debate whether Roman military engineering was consciously systematic or simply evolved pragmatically through centuries of trial and error. Evidence suggests both factors played roles. Practical experience identified what worked, while military architects then codified and refined those solutions into systematic doctrine. The result was engineering that appeared almost instinctive but actually represented accumulated wisdom from hundreds of campaigns and thousands of soldiers' observations. By late afternoon, the gatework is complete. Brennus tests the mechanism personally, having the gates opened and closed multiple times, listening for binding or stress sounds, watching the movement for smoothness. Only when satisfied does he mark the work as complete. Good gates might save the fort, he says simply. Bad gates guarantee it falls, remember that. The evening meal brings unexpected bounty. Fresh meat. A hunting party that went out 3 days ago has returned with a deer, and portions are distributed through the fort. It's not much per person, maybe 2 ounces of venison added to the usual porridge, but the psychological impact is enormous. You can taste the difference. Rich, slightly gamey, a flavour complexity that's been absent from the monotonous grain-based diet. Around you, men eat slowly, savouring each bite, and conversations are livelier than they've been in days. Here's something quirky. Roman soldiers sometimes held informal competitions to see who could make military rations most palatable. Creative seasoning with foraged herbs, different cooking techniques, even elaborate presentation of simple ingredients, anything to break the monotony. Officers usually ignored these activities as long as they didn't interfere with duty, recognising that morale sometimes lived in small pleasures. After the meal, you're assigned to evening watch, second shift, which means you'll stand guard from roughly midnight to dawn. You have a few hours to rest first, and you return to the barrack to prepare. The space is warm now, the day's brazier still radiating heat, and men are settling into various evening routines. Some sleep immediately, exhausted from the day's labour. Others talk quietly, write letters, mend equipment. The atmosphere is relaxed, almost domestic, easy to forget you're in a military installation on a hostile frontier. You check your equipment for watch duty. Heavy cloak, extra under tunic for layering. The scarf you've been knitting from surplus wool scraps, not regulation. But no one cares as long as you're warm enough to stay alert. Your spear stands ready, the iron point sharp, the shaft smooth from years of hands gripping it. Feel the weight of the coming watch settling over you. Not dread exactly, but awareness. For several hours you'll be part of the thin line of alertness that protects sleeping comrades. It's responsibility, trust, duty distilled to its essence. You lie down for the few hours of rest available, wrapping your blanket tight. Around you the barrack sounds fade. Conversations trail off. Movement stills, breathing deepens into sleep patterns. The brazier pops occasionally, settling coals, creating small sounds in the dimness. You might think sleep would be difficult knowing you'll wake soon for watch, but frontier life teaches efficiency. Sleep comes quickly, deep and dreamless, the body taking rest when rest is available. The wake-up comes too soon, a hand on your shoulder, a quiet voice. Watch change in 20 minutes. You surface from sleep slowly, fighting the desire to sink back into warmth and unconsciousness. But duty is duty. You rise, dress in the dark by feel and memory, layer clothing until you're bulky but warm. The barrack is quiet now, except for snoring and the occasional sleep murmur. You move carefully, avoiding waking others, and step out into the night. The cold hits like a physical blow. The temperature has dropped significantly since sunset, and your breath freezes instantly, creating small ice crystals that catch the faint light from torches along the walls. The stars overhead are brilliant, hard points of light in the vast darkness. You climb the ladder to the wall walk, feeling each rung solid beneath your boots, and take your position in the designated section. The guard you're relieving briefs you quickly. Quiet night, nothing moving, cold enough to freeze piss midstream, so stay alert and keep moving. Then you're alone, or as alone as you can be, with other guards stationed every 40 yards along the wall. You can see the nearest ones as shadows, backlit by torches, but conversation across that distance is impossible. Listen to the night, wind moving through the palisade points, creating a soft whistle. The distant crack of ice on the river, expanding and contracting with temperature changes. Your own breathing loud in the silence. The creak of leather as you shift weight from foot to foot. The watch is measured in small increments. You walk your section, 40 paces north, 40 paces back, keeping blood moving, maintaining alertness. Your eyes scan the darkness beyond the walls, looking for movement, for anything that doesn't belong. You might wonder what you're actually looking for in this darkness. The answer is anything unusual. A shadow that moves wrong. A sound that doesn't fit. The sense, hard to define but unmistakable when present, that something is out there watching back. Here's a historical fact. Roman military watch protocols were rigid and seriously enforced. Guards who slept on duty could face execution. Those who failed to raise alarms appropriately could be beaten or demoted. This severity wasn't cruelty. It was recognition that the entire fort's survival depended on watchful eyes during vulnerable night hours. Every soldier understood. Your vigilance protects everyone. Your failure endangers everyone. Hours pass with glacial slowness. The cold seeps through layers of clothing, finding every gap, every thin spot. Your feet go numb first, then fingers despite gloves. You keep moving, keep scanning, keep alert through sheer discipline and awareness of what failure could mean. The river ice groans and cracks periodically, sounds that spike your alertness until you recognise them as natural temperature effects. Each time your heart rate jumps, hand tightening on your spear, eyes straining into darkness. Each time nothing follows. Around what you estimate is the midpoint of your watch, another sound, distant from the forest beyond the river. It could be an animal, could be wind in trees, could be something else. You maintain position, but focus attention in that direction. The sound doesn't repeat. You debate whether to signal the guard commander, decide against it. You're not certain enough, and false alarms erode credibility. But you mark the direction mentally, and keep extra attention focused there for the remainder of your watch. The sky begins to pale eventually. Not sunrise yet, but the deep black softening to charcoal grey. Dawn is coming, and with it the end of your watch. The relief arrives as promised, and you brief them as you were briefed. Quiet night, possible animal noise from the northeast forest around mid-watch. Nothing confirmed. Then you descend the ladder, stiff, with cold and immobility, and make your way to the barrack. Inside, the warmth feels like absolution. You strip off the outer layers and collapse onto your cot, asleep almost before your head settles. Tomorrow, or rather later today, there will be more work. Always more work. But right now, you've done your part, stood your watch, maintained the vigil that keeps the fort safe, and that ultimately is what all the preparation comes down to. People willing to stand cold watches, build strong walls, lay defensive obstacles, maintain gates and weapons and readiness. The engineering matters, but human commitment makes it meaningful. Sleep takes you, deep and earned. You wake to urgency, not alarm exactly, but a tension in the air that pulls you from sleep more effectively than any noise. Men are moving with purpose in the barrack, voices low but focused. River's frozen solid, someone says. Scouts confirmed it this morning. You can walk across. This is the moment everything has been building toward. The natural barrier is gone, the highway is open. Whatever comes next comes soon. Here's a historical fact. The freezing of frontier rivers was a predictable but still dangerous development. Roman commanders along the Rhine-Danube frontier knew approximately when freezing would occur based on years of observation, but exact timing varied with weather conditions. The period immediately after a river froze solid was considered highest risk. Raiders knew Roman forces would be most alert then, so attacks often came either immediately, before defences could fully mobilise, or weeks later after alert fatigue set in. The morning briefing is terse. The fort commander, a grizzled prefect named Lucius Cornelius, who you've barely seen during the construction weeks, addresses the assembled garrison. The Danube is passable. Intelligence from downstream forts indicates increased activity in tribal territories, probably consolidation for winter raiding. Our job is to hold this position and maintain the supply line. We are ready. You've built well, now we prove it. You might feel the shift from preparation to application, from building to defending. Everything you've done over the past weeks, the walls, the towers, the obstacles, the supplies, now transitions from potential to actual. The fort's posture changes immediately. Guard rotations increase to 3-hour shifts instead of 4, ensuring maximum alertness. Watchtower observation becomes continuous, with 2 guards per tower instead of 1. Weapons that have been stored clean but unused are now distributed and kept immediately accessible. Your assignment today: final preparation of defensive positions. This means ensuring every fighting position on the walls has readily available ammunition. Piler, javelins, stones for throwing, spare weapons. It means checking sightlines, identifying dead zones where attackers might approach unseen, finding solutions to cover those gaps. You work with systematic intensity, moving along the wall section by section. At each position, you place a basket of throwing stones. River rocks size for gripping and throwing, heavy enough to do damage. Javelins are stacked at regular intervals, their iron points gleaming dully in the weak winter sunlight. Feel the weight of a pilum in your hands. The shaft is wooden, smooth from use, but the iron point is pyramidal, designed to punch through shields and armour. The balance is perfect for throwing, the weight distribution allowing surprising accuracy at ranges up to 30 yards. Listen to the sounds of preparation, weapons being tested and checked, leather creaking as armour is adjusted, the rhythmic sharpening of blades on whetstones, low conversations as soldiers discuss defensive assignments and tactics. The atmosphere is focused but not panicked. These are professionals who've prepared thoroughly and now trust that preparation. Fear exists. You'd be stupid or lying to deny it. But it's managed, channeled into readiness rather than paralysis. Here's a fringe fact. Roman soldiers sometimes personalised defensive positions with small improvements, stacking stones for better footing, rigging simple overhead covers against arrows, even carving handholds into wooden walls for better bracing when thrusting spears. Officers generally allowed these modifications as long as they didn't compromise structural integrity, recognising that soldiers who'd customised positions fought more effectively from them. Midday brings the first test, riders approaching from across the frozen river. The watchtower signals, 3 horsemen, not moving aggressively, possibly scouts or envoys. The fort doesn't open gates or send out a party. Instead, an officer climbs to the wall and shouts across the distance in Germanic dialect, one of the auxiliary soldiers from local tribes who serves as translator. You can't hear the conversation clearly from your position, but you watch the interaction. The riders stay well back beyond javelin range, and the exchange is brief. Then they turn and ride back across the river, disappearing into the forest. "What did they want?" someone asks when the translator officer descends. "To see if we're here and alert," he responds. "And now they know we are." It's probing, testing, gathering intelligence. The chess game has begun. The afternoon continues with drills, not full-scale combat exercises, but rehearsals of specific defensive scenarios. What happens if the north wall is breached? How do forces redeploy? What if the gate is threatened? Who reinforces? Who maintains perimeter watch? You run through the movements until they're automatic. Alarm sounds, you grab weapons and move to designated secondary position, await orders. It's choreography, muscle memory, removing the need for thought in moments when thought might be too slow. Scholars debate the effectiveness of Roman drill culture. Critics argue it created inflexibility. Soldiers so trained to follow orders they couldn't adapt to unexpected situations. Defenders counter that drill created baseline competence from which adaptation could occur. You learn the standard response so thoroughly that variations come naturally when circumstances demand them. The truth likely incorporated both elements. Drill created foundation, but good commanders ensured soldiers understood why, not just what. As evening approaches, the fort's routine takes on new weight. The meal is substantial, command wants soldiers well fed and strong, and the atmosphere in the mess area is subdued but not grim. Men eat steadily, talking in the low voices, the humour darker than usual but still present. "So when they come," someone says, "think they'll knock first, or just be rude about it?" "Probably bring wine," another responds. "Hospitality and all." The laughter is brief but genuine. Tension released through humour, one of humanity's oldest coping mechanisms. After the meal, you're assigned to a composite guard rotation. Not regular watch, but a roving patrol inside the fort, checking that all stations are manned, all equipment ready, all personnel alert. It's redundancy layered on redundancy, but no one complains. You walk the fort's perimeter, and it feels different now. The walls you helped build, the towers you watched rise, the ditches you helped dig. All of it transitions from construction project to life or death infrastructure. The stakes are tangible now in a way they weren't when this was future tense preparation. The night deepens, clear and cold, stars emerging in their countless thousands. From the wall you can see faint lights across the river, campfires perhaps in the forest, or maybe just reflection of starlight on ice. Impossible to tell. You might wonder what's happening over there in the darkness beyond the frozen river. Are warriors gathering, planning, preparing their own assault? Or is it just families huddled around fires, trying to survive winter like everyone else? The truth is probably complex, some of both, motivations mixed, desperation and opportunity intertwined. It's easier to think of enemies as purely hostile, but humanity is rarely that simple. The watch continues through the night, your shift, then others, the rhythm of vigilance unbroken. Nothing happens, no attack comes. Dawn arrives with painful brightness. light reflecting off snow and ice until the world seems made of white and blue and the pale gold of winter sunrise. The day begins again, drills, preparation, maintenance, waiting. This becomes the new pattern. Readiness sustained, day after day, alert but not yet tested. Days pass this way. Then a week. The ice thickens on the river, solid enough that you could march the entire garrison across it. The temperatures drop further, bone-deep cold that makes even brief exposure dangerous, and still, nothing comes. You begin to understand a different kind of challenge, maintaining readiness when nothing happens. The initial spike of alert energy can't be sustained indefinitely. Human psychology doesn't work that way. Gradually, inevitably, the edge dulls, not to negligence, everyone's too professional for that, but to routine. Here's a historical fact. Military historians identify alert fatigue as a genuine tactical challenge. Forces mobilized for threats that don't immediately materialize face difficult choices, maintain costly high alert status indefinitely, or relax to sustainable readiness and risk being caught unprepared. Roman frontier commanders dealt with this constantly, balancing between readiness and sustainability, sometimes for entire winters, where threats loomed but never materialized. The work continues because work must continue. Maintenance never stops, supplies must be managed, training must be maintained. You rotate through assignments, wall guard, patrol duty, maintenance crews, supply handling. The days blur together, differentiated mainly by which miserable task occupies your time. But something's building, you can feel it even if you can't articulate it. The scouts report movement in tribal territories. Smoke from distant fires suggests population concentration somewhere beyond normal settlement patterns. Intelligence from other forts indicates raids further east along the frontier. Something is coming. The only questions are when and whether the preparations you've made will be sufficient. The answer, when it comes, arrives not with dramatic warning but simple observation. A watchtower guard noting movement at dawn, multiple groups crossing the frozen river, not yet toward the fort but paralleling it, moving with purpose. The alarm sounds, controlled, not panic but clear. Threat identified, positions manned. Readiness now. You grab weapons and move to your designated wall section. The movement's automatic from weeks of drill. Around you, the garrison deploys with practiced efficiency, every person moving to assigned positions, the fort transforming from sleeping installation to alert defense in minutes. From the wall you can see them now, groups of warriors, maybe 200 total, moving across the frozen landscape. They're not charging the fort, not yet, but their intent is clear. They're probing, testing, looking for weakness or opportunity. The prefect's voice carries across the fort. Steady, hold position, watch and wait. So you watch and wait, and understand that the waiting, the preparation has led to this. The moment where everything you've built is tested against everything they can bring. The frozen river has become a road, and someone is using it.